In this video, I'll be going over the 2020 to 2021 schedule. The most important thing about this schedule is that it works both in person and distance learning. Our small group decided that it's really important that we don't have schedule changes as the year progresses, and maybe we transition to in person or away from in person. The schedule will also allow students to see all of their teachers once per week. However, for the schedule to work, it's going to require that we have asynchronous access to content and practice available to students. One big reason is that students may be opting out of in person instruction, even if we're providing in person instruction. And finally, Wednesdays are going to be exclusively for virtual learning. I think it helps to take a look at a simplified example of how the schedule works. In this example, let's imagine we're looking at one grade level that has been split into 4 groups. So on Monday, Group 1 would rotate through an A schedule. They'd be seeing teachers and going through classes on their A schedule. Group 2, on the other hand, would be going through the B schedule. At the same time, Groups 3 and 4 would be completing virtual learning. They might be going over content or completing assignments. On Tuesday, then Group 1 switches to the B schedule, and Group 2 switches to the A schedule, while Groups 3 and 4 still continue their virtual learning. Now, this can work both in person and completely online. If this happens in person, then Group 1 would see their A scheduled teachers on Monday, Group 2 would see their B scheduled teachers on Monday, and those groups would flip-flop Monday and Tuesday. If we're doing a distance learning model, the same thing works. On Monday, Group 1 would log in and have a virtual class with their A scheduled teachers, while Group 2 would have virtual class with their B scheduled teachers. And again, they would flip-flop on Tuesday. You'll notice Wednesday is virtual for all the groups. And then on Thursday, Friday, we switch what happens. On Thursday, Friday, Groups 3 and 4 that were virtual then go through their A schedules and B schedules, while Groups 1 and 2 transition to their distance learning material. A big thing to keep in mind here is that if we're doing in-person learning, the Wednesday becomes a nice opportunity for us to disinfect the building between groups of students coming in. So let's take a look at what students can expect with this schedule. First is that students will have 2 days of class per week, with the remaining 3 days being virtual work days. A nice thing about the schedule is it allows every student to see their teachers once per week. Again, the small group decided that the social emotional impact and relationship building that comes from seeing their teachers is really important. On the teacher's end, we'll be providing content and practice asynchronously. Again, some students may opt out of in-person learning even if it's offered, so everything has to be provided online. When it comes to actually teaching, we'll be seeing half a cohort during each class block. So instead of seeing 30 students for a class, we'll be down to 15. During the day, every teacher can expect to have 2 90-minute blocks. And Wednesdays are reserved for office hours for learners. And Wednesdays are also there for any of those students who opt out of in-person learning and want to do completely distance learning. Those students would have access to a distance learning class on Wednesdays. Looking at a more specific example, here's a sample 6th grade schedule. Again, this would be like group one from the simplified example that I did earlier. So on Monday, students would go through their A-day schedule. There's a staggered entry followed by morning circles. This provides students time for social emotional support and also to go over any of the things that they might have upcoming that day. Following circle, students would go to a 90-minute math block, then lunch, followed by a 90-minute science block, a 90-minute art block, and then a closing circle. Again, the closing circle is there for social emotional support as well as helping students organize any of the work that they're going to have to be doing during their 3 virtual work days. Come Tuesday, students would again have morning circle, followed by humanities, lunch, lab, and then yoga, each of those being 90 minutes long. The end of the day ends with closing circle again before dismissal. Now, this sample is based on an in-person schedule, but you can imagine that this schedule also works in a completely distance learning model. In a distance learning model, students would start their day with a morning circle, perhaps, followed by logging into a 90-minute math class. Then they would break for lunch at home, followed by logging in for science, then art, and possibly a closing circle. You notice that the group in this sample, then would have Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday as their virtual work days. During those virtual work days, they'd be completing assignments, accessing content, and working independently. Next, it's important to take a look at a teacher schedule, and here's mine. On Monday and Tuesday, you'll notice that I'm teaching my 7th grade cohorts. So using the cohorts from last year, this would mean that I'm seeing half of Yale on Monday and the other half of Yale on Tuesday. That may be seeing them in person if we're going back in person. Or it might be hosting an online class for half of Yale on Monday and then half of Yale on Tuesday. Uh, by design, this allows me to have small group instruction either in person to allow distancing or virtually. Then in the afternoon, I would teach half of a 6th grade cohort on Monday and the other half on Tuesday. Then on Thursday and Friday, I would see my 2nd, 6th cohort, again, half on Thursday, half on Friday. Now the last piece is important. Remember that each teacher is responsible for 2 blocks per day. You'll notice on Monday and Tuesday, I'm teaching both of my blocks. But on Thursday, Friday, I have a lab or a virtual block. That block is there that if we go in person, I might actually physically man a lab block where I'd be available to students. Or if we're in a virtual learning environment, that also frees me up to host sort of an open class time where students can log in, ask questions, get clarifications, and so forth. That block might also work in an in-person learning model where students who are on their virtual work days, if they need help, if they can't access their teachers because their teachers are teaching in person, I would be available to answer questions or troubleshoot. What this allows is it allows every student to see each teacher once during the week, and it allows students to seek help during the week from a trusted adult. Lastly, here's the key ideas. The big one is that this schedule requires that content is accessible online. Again, we have those students who may opt out of in-person learning. We're also going to have to provide work and content to students on their virtual work days. For kids, they'll have 2 class days followed by 3 work days. And from a teacher perspective, we're all responsible for 2 blocks per day. And finally, I think the most important one is just to keep in mind that this schedule works regardless of the COVID phase we're in. If we're required to start in person, well, then this schedule works pretty nicely, allowing us to have social distancing and decontamination on Wednesdays. If we start at distance learning, again, the schedule works out nicely in that we have small groups. Kids have access to all their teachers at least once a week, and teachers available to help out if their teacher is currently teaching. So hopefully that was a fairly clear overview of what the schedule looks like. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions, and I know Matt is happy to answer them all.